The Law and Order president is at it again, letting one of the most notorious congressional fraudsters out of jail scot-free. Just what exactly does it take to get a pardon from the commander-in-chief? And more importantly, does the law still apply to any of us? I'm Paul, U.S. Army combat veteran. Let's talk about it. Okay, so this is directly from the president's mouth, saying that George Santos was somewhat of a rogue. But there are many rogues throughout our country that aren't forced to serve 7 years in prison. Then he goes on a long rant talking about Richard Blumenthal, a senator who lied about his Vietnam War service. Right? He goes on and on and on and on, which, boy, criticizing someone else's military service is a really rich coming from a draft dodger. But then he continues. Whatever Richard Blumenthal did is way worse than what George Santos did. And George Santos had the courage, conviction, and intelligence to always vote Republican. He said he's been in solitary confinement. Not true. He's in a minimum security facility for long stretches of time and by all accounts horribly mistreated. Therefore, I commuted George Santos from prison. Now, George Santos, for those of you that don't know, is a Republican congressman from the state of New York who essentially won his election through an absolutely eye-watering level of fraud. And he defrauded basically everyone he came in contact with. Really, the scale is almost unbelievable. There's actually not that much known about the real George Santos. He appears to have been some sort of Brazilian who grew up in a favela somewhere. And again, nobody seems to know whether he lived there or visited there. But what is true is that in around 2019, 2020, he began running for Congress, right, after committing what appear to be a series of low-level sort of frauds. And in 2020, let's just start here. Basically, he decided that being an impoverished Brazilian fraudster was not going to endear him to voters. So he said, well, why don't I just be anything else? In fact, he lied, saying that he was raised Catholic and also raised Jewish, half Jewish, a non-observant Jew, a proud American Jew, and a Latino Jew. Truly impressive. He said his maternal grandfather grew up Jewish, then converted to Catholicism, then was raised Catholic. And then he said, I believe we are all Jewish. Whoa, congrats, guys. And Jesus is Jewish. If we believe in Jesus, then we're all brothers in Christ. I mean, truly brilliant. Then in a 2020 interview, Santos said, I never claimed I was Jewish. I'm Catholic. I said I was Jewish. Truly brilliant stuff. The Republican Jewish Coalition asserted Santos would no longer be welcome at their events because he had deceived the organization and misrepresented his Jewish heritage. And then he tried to prove it via DNA kits, but he didn't actually release the actual DNA kits. Then he also said that his mother was, quote, the first female executive at a major financial institution and worked at the South Tower of the World Trade Center and died a few years after surviving the 9/11 attacks. But she didn't apply for a U.S. visa until 2003 and had not been in the country since 1999, right? In fact, her actual occupation, Santos's mother, was domestic worker and home care nurse, right? Right? Santos lied that he had a bachelor's degree in finance from Bausch College, right? Which, of course, he would have attended while living in Brazil. He also claimed he had been a star player on the volleyball team. The university had no volleyball team. He also said he defeated Yale University in the NCAA championships. Yale, of course, has no men's varsity basketball team. He said his volleyball career led to him needing both knees replaced, which is absurd for a man who is 35. And he also said he had an MBA from NYU and that he had paid off his student loans by 2020. Just comical, but he didn't appear to know the actual name of NYU's business school. It's Stern, and any graduate's going to know that. He called himself a seasoned Wall Street financier and investor who had worked for Citigroup and Goldman. He claimed instead he worked as a call center representative for a cable network. He also said that he founded a company that had employees killed at the Pulse nightclub shooting in Orlando, a place he's never lived or worked. I mean, you guys have to understand that this guy was one of the most prolific liars ever to pass through Congress. But even more disturbing is the fraud, right? Because he went out here getting paid. He basically lied to donors to the tune of tens or even hundreds of thousands of dollars, telling them that a personal company he controlled was actually a super PAC and that he was funneling money into the super PAC, which instead he was just using to pay himself as though it was, well, regular shit. Now, again, the super PAC, he literally dropped money. Buckle up for this one. $4,000 on Hermes purses or whatever, plastic surgery and Botox, personal credit card, paying off his credit cards, Atlantic City and Las Vegas gambling trips, and of course, OnlyFans subscriptions. Damn, dude, it doesn't get more pathetic than you're a literal congressman, flush in cash, and you're still simping for OnlyFans creators? Truly, truly astounding, right? Now, it turned out that he also had committed a sweeping fraud in Brazil, was evicted from at least 3 different properties when he lived in Queens over unpaid rent. Right, so he was a rent fraudster, created a fake animal rescue charity. I mean, it just really... So he ended up getting federally prosecuted because, well, even the House Ethics Committee was like, dude, you are the most prolific fraudster in maybe history. And here's what I want to point out, though, is that, he pled guilty, got 7 years, and was required to pay restitution to victims. And I don't know, corrupting the essence of Congress, the essence of the American electoral system, 7 years is like getting off easy. I don't know what to tell you. But here's what I want to point out. In January 2023, piece of shit Richie Torres and Dan Goldman, House Democrats from New York, filed an ethics complaint over Santos's financial disclosure reports, saying, hey, he didn't drop all of his OnlyFans subscriptions in here. House Ethics Committee does a whole thing, does a whole investigation, makes a report, and finds all of this wrongdoing and recommends criminal charges. And so the House itself said, dude, you can't be doing this. Here's what's hilarious. Right now, the link to that report is dead. Why? Probably because George Santos is out scot-free, and it makes the Republicans look real bad if you can lay out everything this absolute maniac did to defraud Congress and voters and donors. But trust me, of those crimes, undoubtedly, Congress is most angry that he defrauded donors. Guys, you do not come between a congressman and the donors that own them, okay? That's like walking up and stabbing a cop's dog with a knife, dude. You're gonna get shot. Like, you're cooked. So Santos, of course, immediately after being expelled from Congress, offered personalized videos on Cameo. Saying that Santos's videos were one of the best launches the website ever had, and he earned well over the salary of a member of Congress. And, oh my God, this is brilliant. Senator John Fetterman spent $343 for Cameo video from George Santos as a prank against Bob Menendez, who's also a criminal who took a bunch of literal gold from Egyptian criminals. Yeah, bars of gold. Now, I point all this out. We covered actually a lot of this already on this channel because, well, congressional corruption is kind of a hobby of mine. But the problem is these guys went to prison because you not just committed a crime. It's not like you should go to prison if you rob anybody of $100,000 through fraud and deception. But you robbed Congress. You violated the integrity, right? Someone ran against George Santos and was like a real resident of New York, was a real resident of that district, who had real ideas, who had a real resume. But how can you compete with a liar? How can you compete with someone who says, who's like, oh, my mom died in 9/11, and I'm Jewish, and I'm Catholic, and I worked at Citibank, and I worked at JP Morgan. You can't beat that because it's not physically possible. And so every voter in that district lost because somebody should have had the opportunity to vote for a real candidate, a non-fraudulent candidate. And they didn't because George Santos deprived the voters of that right. And again, further evidence that to the president, voters are idiots. They're suckers. They are a problem to be overcome. The fact that Santos had to lie and cheat his way into office is a trivial matter to the president. That's why he gave him a pass. Even though he's like, listen, Sutter, here's this other guy that also defrauded himself, that also misrepresented who and what he was. And that's wrong. He should probably also be in jail if he's found to have systematically done that, right? Or at least be kicked out of Congress. But all of this is part of this pattern that says that, again, corrupting Congress is just a thing that happens. I want to point out that this is simultaneous to the fact that voters in Arizona, right, elected a congressman who won a special election, Adelita Grijalva, right? She won her election. She showed up to Congress, and Mike Johnson said, "You're not allowed to sit. You are not allowed to represent Congress." Fun fact, lads, Mike Johnson doesn't have the authority. Voters decide who represents them in Congress, not Mike Johnson. And he has still, at the president's behest, refused to allow her to do her job. This is like, I don't know what else to tell you. This is like some like extremely troubling things, right? Elections only count if the president wants them to. That's not a democracy, right? Putin's elections only count because he wants them to. Xi Jinping's elections only count when he wants them to. That's not how it goes in America. So again, this is part of this frightening trend of the House of the People, Congress, particularly House of Representatives, getting absolutely just steamrolled. And don't get me wrong, there's a bunch of problems. Again, Santos is the worst. He's not the only congressman to misrepresent his background to score political votes. And the acquiescence to donors, the big lobby groups, like there's a lot wrong. But fundamentally, like at its most basic level, democracy works because voters choose who gets to run the government. And when the people in charge of the government get to choose who runs the country, then you are stuck with a different system. And here's a clue, guys. It's not democracy. Anyway, hit subscribe. Join us over on combatvetnews.com if you want to support me. And thanks to Sergei Zinchenko, Alan Lutz, Hal Franceschi, Paul Wheeler, Michael Clean, Jeff Davies, Franz Karius, Thomas Anderson, Eugenia Cuesta, and all of our Lieutenant tier members. Hit subscribe. That helps. See ya.